It's time for Recipe of the Day. Merry Christmas! If you are cooking today, I have a recipe that you can be listening to for a little while you cook. So, you know my usual pork loin roast recipe has a reverse sear. I tell you about this all the time, and I will link to the recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode. But you are basically cooking the pork loin for a little while, and then once it's nearly done, you take it out, let it rest, and then it goes in high heat at the end to get a nice brown crust on it. And then because it rested already and you're only putting it in high heat for a short time, you can slice it right away and serve. So that is the basic for my pork loin roast. But today I'm adding an extra layer of flavor, and we are doing a garlic pork loin roast. Now I'm just going to start off right off the bat and make sure we're talking about the same thing. I am not talking about pork tenderloin. That is a lot thinner, and if you cook it the way I'm about to tell you to do, it will be way overcooked. I am talking about a pork loin roast. It's a bigger cylinder. I would say that the diameter is about 4 inches. Now, sometimes these weigh 8 to 10 pounds. They're really long, but usually I see them cut in half or in thirds, being like 2 to 5 pounds. So you're not likely going to see the long one. Usually when I see the really long one, I think it's meant for like cutting in pieces at home and then freezing as separate roasts. I would even say if you get that really long one and want to do the whole thing for a dinner, you might want to cut it in half just so it cooks a little bit more evenly and doesn't dry out on the outside before it cooks to the middle. But yes, we're talking about a pork loin roast. It sometimes has fat on one side, and it's very pink, very lean meat, and it's going to probably be between 2 to 5 pounds, and it is definitely not pork tenderloin. I should also just say here that if you have a different cut of pork, if you've got a pork shoulder or a pork butt roast, you're going to cook those differently from what I'm about to say, so I will link to how to cook those in the show notes for this episode so that you can head over there and get that, or go to cookthestory.com and search for pork roasts and you will see them all there. You also could follow this recipe if you have a pork rib roast. That's what's actually used for a crown roast. A crown roast is 2 of the rib roasts put together. Like half of that, where you have all those rib bones coming out of the pork loin roast. You could use this, but I have an even better recipe for if you have the rib roast, so I will link to that for you as well. So this is a boneless pork loin that's best here for the garlic roast pork. That was a lot to just get to what kind of meat we have, but I think it's kind of the most important part. You need to know that you have the right cut before you start. Okay, so assuming you have the right cut, what do you do next? Preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you're going to get out your food processor or blender, and to it you're adding 12 cloves of garlic. This is a garlic pork loin after all. 12 cloves of garlic into the food processor with 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of fresh rosemary leaves, or you could do a teaspoon of dried, 2 tablespoons of fresh sage leaves, or you could do half a teaspoon of dried and 2 tablespoons of fresh thyme leaves, or you could do a teaspoon of dried, as well as a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. And you're going to pulse that until it becomes a coarse, wet paste that you are spreading all over the pork. Now, I will say that this is a great cut to brine before you do all of that. If you have the time, you should brine the pork loin, and I will link to how to do that, but it's basically 1 tablespoon of coarse kosher salt to every cup of water. You dissolve that in there. You could add some garlic powder to that as well. Once it's dissolved though, the garlic powder makes it cloudy and then you can't tell if the salt is dissolved. And then you want your pork loin fully submerged, and you refrigerate it for 3 to 4 hours. You don't want to go more than 4 hours or it gets quite salty. And then all that you would change in this recipe is that you wouldn't add the salt to the food processor mixture. You would omit that and just go with the garlic, olive oil, herbs, and pepper. Okay, so whether you've brined it or not, you know what you are doing, and you've made this paste and you've spread it all over the pork. And then you're going to put the pork on a rack in a roasting pan, fat side up. If you don't have a rack that fits in your roasting pan, it needs to be an oven safe rack. You can use 3 ribs of celery. That's what the single stems of celery are called, ribs. You want to put 3 ribs of celery in your pan, or you can use whole carrots, 3 carrots, and then you put the roast on top of that. And that just lets the air circulate underneath. You're not going to eat those celery or carrots. They're just there to help you out. Then you are roasting that at 350 degrees Fahrenheit until it gets to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. 145 is the safe temperature for pork. You could take it out a little bit earlier, 135, and let it rise up to 145 as it rests. Or if you want to be super, super safe, you wait till it's 145. That is up to you. And I will say, as I always do, that back in the day, they used to recommend that pork be at 160 degrees Fahrenheit to be safe. And so a lot of us grew up with pork cooked quite a bit more well done than it is nowadays. And if that's what you're used to, if you don't like that slight pink in the meat color of your pork, you can cook it higher. I would go to 150 here and take it out and let it rise up. But I do always say that it is worth giving it a try even just once. If you are somebody who likes it more well done, try taking it out even at 140 so it rises up to 150 and see how you like it. It is going to be more tender and more juicy. If you don't like it, don't do that next time, right? Okay, so that to get it up to that temperature, to the 145 minimum, is going to be 20 to 25 minutes per pound. I say the best thing to do is to use a probe thermometer where you can see the temperature outside of your oven and monitor it. The thing about these pork loin roasts is that they're not all the same thickness. Some of them are quite a bit narrower than others, and some are thicker, and so they take a different amount of time. You could have a 3-pound pork loin roast that is quite a bit thicker than a different 3-pound pork loin roast, and they're going to take a different amount of time. So if you have the probe thermometer, then you have a good idea how close it's getting to being done, which can help you time the rest of your dinner so that you are on track. And if you do not have that kind of thermometer and you're using like an instant read thermometer, start checking at 15 minutes per pound, just in case you have one that is cooking more quickly. You just might, right? Now, when I said that you can monitor that temperature so that you can get the rest of your dinner kind of ready on time, you know when things are going to be done and what you're aiming for, there's something in this recipe that also helps with that. And that is that we're going to take the roast out when it hits the temperature you want, and we're going to let it rest covered with foil for 30 minutes. Now you can start getting all those last minute things done in those 30 minutes. If you already had your potatoes peeled and in salted water, they will cook in the time that this pork is roasting. So spend those 30 minutes getting those last bits of dinner made. And then after the 30 minutes, increase the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, put the roast back in a roasting pan and roast it in that hot oven for just about 10 minutes. Watch it carefully. You want it nicely browned on the outside. Then you take it out. It is already rested. You rested it for those 30 minutes. The 10 minutes in that hot oven are not going to get all the juices like all simmering and bubbling again. So you can go ahead and slice and serve that immediately. Okay, I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to remember that today is December 25th of 2025. In the show notes for this podcast episode, I will also include all the links that I told you about, including a link for pork gravy as well, because you're going to want to make some gravy with this one. I will say that I didn't say this earlier. If you do want to make gravy, it's a good idea to put a little bit of stock or broth in the roasting pan while the roast is cooking. Pork loin doesn't tend to give off a lot of drippings when it's cooking, and that will get you some nice pork flavored drippings in the bottom of the pan so that you can make that pork gravy. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful day cooking or eating or both and spending time with someone you love. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookville.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, cookfor2.us, and this podcast recipe of the day. Merry Christmas. Let's get cooking.